Role play. I would like to call Mr. Rohan Sabnis, Vice President Sales, KAM and Demand Generation, Growers.ai. Can we have a huge round of applause for Mr. Rohan, please?
Fellow L&D professionals, I think one of my favorite way of interacting with people in L&D is always about how we got into it. All of us have got into L&D in very interesting stories. Most people, didn't start their career thinking I'm going to be an L&D professional. A lot of people have been as part of the business, learned that this is a very important function. This is what scales up quality. So it's very diverse, interesting stories, and that's how I usually, get to interact with most of you. I'll maybe just start with a quick story of how I got into L&D. So I'm a chartered accountant. I did my articleship in the industry in audit in Deloitte, and I did a lot of CA-related things. One thing I was very clear is this is not what I want to do. This was back in 2015. Most of us might have landed in careers where we know what we don't want to do. So this was in 2015, and the idea was that let me do something on my own. Again, entrepreneurship was suddenly the cool thing to do. Failing was okay, and all of that, right? So the question was, what do I do? One thing that I always didn't find in my CA journey was the ability to meet new people, have conversations, go beyond sitting at a desk. And I've always learned a lot from very different people from very different backgrounds. So the question was, how do I help other people do this? So we started something which was on the lines of peer-to-peer learning, where you could approach anyone, sitting in a hall like this, sitting in an airport, sitting at a cafe. You could approach anyone and talk to them about what they are really good at and learn from them. So this is where the journey of my entrepreneurship started, and we called it Skill Street. The concept, in short, is like a Tinder for learning, right? Where you can approach anyone, talk to them, have a conversation. There is nothing, there's no commercial implication yet. When we actually launched it, the events that we had worked very well. But when it came to actually doing it through a tool, doing it at scale, we realized that most people don't want to do unless there is something in it for them. They don't want to just have conversations for learning. They want something to come out of it, right? So the most feasible, the two common things that we saw is either people wanted job opportunities or they wanted a life partner. It depends on the age, but typically these are the two things that people expect when they get time, or maybe some monetary benefit. So, these were some of the things that we saw, and to a large extent, trust was a big challenge, right? I don't want to meet a stranger, in such a scenario where there is no trust established. We did some reflecting and a bit of humility to go on the ground, talk to people. What do you really need? How does this work? How do you really want to learn? And the key insight for us was to do B2B. Where the trust is already built, people already definitely want to grow. There is an L&D team driving these kind of initiatives. And there is also a lot of people who are very good performers. They are doing a lot of things that are not documented, but there is no incentive for them to share it with people at large. So, how do we create something like this? So that's how I got into L&D. I learned a lot about software as a service, L&D, and while I was an entrepreneur, I was also teaching part-time in some colleges. So I also love teaching as an aspect, and all of this kind of came together. So I've been in this space for the last almost 10 years now, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is a very niche area of L&D that we deal with. So we started with doing a lot of learning management systems where a lot of it's become almost a hygiene today. LMS is not a differentiator at all, right? Every company out there has an LMS. LMS for onboarding, LMS for continuous improvement. The biggest challenge is LMSs are very good at technical skills. They are good at product knowledge, processes, anywhere where knowledge is the main thing that we're trying to drive. Not only can it be communicated, but it can also be assessed pretty fairly, right? You have objective examinations, and a lot of, again, systems built in where people can't cheat. So you can assess pretty objectively whether people know certain things or not. But when it comes to the behavioral or the softer skills, we've still seen that these are still largely being done, physically. In our physical workshops, in our in-person workshops that we schedule. And we realize that it's not something that can be replaced. There is a certain value to what a trainer can do in a classroom, and that can never be replaced. And I'm sure a lot of us have actually done that a lot. But the question is, the trainers are not able to do things at the scale that we would like to do. In a lot of larger organizations, at the frequency that we would like to do, and with the level of we want to also exterminate the level of bias so that we make it even more objective. So that's essentially what we tried to do. And with the emergence of Gen AI in the last 2 years, 1 year maybe, we found a way to do this. So I'm going to talk to you quickly about a field study that we conducted and what were our observations. So first is conversational skills are always learned by practice. You can't consume some good video on public speaking and do public speaking. You can't consume a video on interview and do an interview. I mean, you might do a fair job, but the real improvement comes from practice. And we always used to do this in the old days. Doing something in front of the mirror was a thing. Today, very few people would do it. But when you do it in front of the mirror, there is one more thing that doesn't happen. You don't get feedback. You may try to practice in front of the mirror, but if you're doing it all by yourself, you don't get the feedback that you want, and hence you're not able to improve beyond what you can see. So, when people practice for interviews, they usually do it with some family member or some friend, and they expect some unbiased feedback. But again, the person or the friend doesn't know what an interviewer expects. The third, what we learned about conversational skills is you need constant iteration and configurability. So what I mean by iteration and configurability is, one, whatever scenarios that we are trying to do have to be extremely relevant to the person who is taking it. It has to be in the flow of their work. Like if I'm in a pharma company and I'm a medical rep talking to an HCP, I don't want a scenario which is created for an IT company or created for a back office. I wanted a scenario which is very specific to me. And when people do it, as L&D professionals, we find out a lot about what we have created. Is it working or not? What are some of the things that are not working? So that iteration and how fast that iteration can happen is also super important. So based on these three learnings, and a lot of conversation with L&D leaders as well as people on the ground, we created a tool called GrowWiz. So GrowWiz is a conversational role play tool, which is not a platform by itself, which means it can easily fit into your existing LMSs. It can work outside an LMSs plainly on a browser. So how it works, how people log in is not the issue. The main question is what it does, right? So GrowWiz can have conversations with the learner, and it can play any person. It can either play a customer if you want to simulate a sales scenario. It can play the customer if you want to simulate a customer success scenario or a customer service scenario. It can play, let's say, the reportee if we want to simulate a first-time manager doing a review. It can also play the interviewer if someone wants to practice for an interview. So it can play any of these roles, and we can simulate it to play these roles. The second part is it can assess very org-specific skills. So all of us have a competency framework. It's usually our bread and butter, and that's how we have a learning scorecard where we measure this. So we can define each of our competencies the way we want to in these conversations, and we can also set levels, right? So for example, something like an empathy is very, very subjective. How I would define empathy might be very different from how a particular organization would define it. So we can actually put demonstrative behaviors of what level 1 is to what level 5 is, and the AI can learn based on that. So it's very specific to how we would assess things. The last is you get insights on what happens at the moment of truth. So in role plays, one of the most powerful things is we as trainers get to know what people actually are doing. They have gone through an 8-hour workshop, but at the end, what are they really able to show? Both in terms of knowledge, how are they able to articulate it, how are they able to structure it. So you get a lot of understanding of what happens on the ground. The problem is we can't do it often enough. Calling people to a classroom across different geographies is not easy. So how can we get this moment of truth more often? Okay, if we have a workshop, let's say today, how can I have this 2 weeks later, 1 month later, 3 months later, 1 year later? So that 1 year later, if I realize that someone has not had enough practice and is struggling here, I can then call them to a workshop. So that's the fourth part. When we built these role plays, there was a lot of things that we had to think about. Something as simple as infra and security, right? So today, a lot of these kind of tools are built using Gen AI, different open services that are already out there. So let's say we use some of ChatGPT, we use a lot of translation tools and so on, but we don't want our organization's data going out there. So how do we, proof for that, but also get the value that we want? So we created a lot of mechanisms where we could do this. All sensitive data could be masked. Wherever client names are mentioned, organization names are mentioned, or internal things are mentioned, we can mask them and ensure that none of these go out as prompts. Audio versus video was a big consideration. that ideally, when I'm simulating a real conversation, someone sitting in front of me, I want, if the AI is acting as a customer, I want to see their expressions if I'm meeting them. But the challenge was that the speed of response wasn't as fast. So today we have started as audio, and in the next 2 months, we'll also have video coming in. So the idea was always to go fast, iterate, see what people, how the response comes, what people on the ground actually do, and then keep building more and more. Understand multiple accents and dialects. In a country like India, especially when we're talking about voice, it's not just languages. It's not just English, Hindi, Tamil, Telugu. It's understanding English of Andhra, how it's different from English of the North, how it's different from English of the Northeast, and different regional dialects. So one is the AI able to understand these dialects? Second is the AI actually able to talk in these dialects? These are two things that we have cracked quite well, and we have not done all languages at this point. We are trying to do each language in all of these versions, so it's a bit more holistic. So what we really do here is we start from the client-specific context. If I'm doing a scenario for, let's say, Torrent Pharma, I start with a lot of context about what Torrent Pharma is, what is the specific therapeutic areas it's present in, what does a medical rep on the ground do, and so on. I come to the AI persona. So let's say I'm defining a doctor that the medical rep goes and talks to. This doctor, what persona is he? Is he a key opinion leader or business leader? That's a common word in pharma. So, depending on that, the whole conversation plays out. Is he more interested in science, or is he more interested in the numbers and the margins? What is the mood of the doctor? Because again, mood is something that we want to prepare people for. So how do we define if the person is in an irritated mood, is in a defensive mood, and so on? And the person could also be in an open mood. We might start off with that and then go on to build more difficult scenarios. And you relate to prior learning that, if we are doing something pre-workshop, post-workshop, how does it relate, and so on. I'll quickly skip this and come to an example. I think the quality is not super clear, but I'll still try to show you what this is. So this is an example of a scenario that we have created. This is for an IT service company. A first-time manager is doing his first review with a person who's been with the organization for the last more than 4 years. He's always been a good performer, but in the recent past, his performance has dipped. And there are some 3-4 issues that have been kind of put in about where his performance has dipped. As a manager, you have to talk to this person, understand what the real issue is, and come up with an action plan. So it's slightly challenging as a first-time manager to be able to do this. There are certain points to be covered that come in the conversation. There are certain skills that are mapped. So this is empathy, communication skills, and listening. So these are the 3 skills that are mapped. And even in empathy, you can see 1 says struggles to recognize one's feelings and so on, and 5 says something else. So we can define what empathy level 1, what level 5 is, and so on. I'll actually show you a small recording of where this is actually playing out. Could you play the video? Okay.
So are you able to create questions for all the competencies of each summit, or is it only limited to a certain
section? So one is all competencies. So we haven't defined, let's say, 10 competencies that we can do things for. We can define any competency and build out a scenario. Second, there are no questions. These are actual scenarios, and the conversation plays out in these scenarios.
So to take the question one step ahead, is it that the person is talking to an AI bot? Is that how it works? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm actually trying to show you the conversation. Okay. Okay, so this is an actual recording that we have done. Play the sound, please. Okay, so there's an actual conversation that's playing out where I record my response of what I would say to the AI. It takes about 10 seconds for the AI to respond, and it can respond in a regional dialect as well. So where I get the response and I can actually hear the AI talking, and we'll be happy to show this to you at the booth. But the way the AI talks, it will not seem robotic at all. It has to seem very natural. It has to seem accentuated. there have to be pauses. It has to feel very real. The voice could be a specific dialect. So I think what we have taken here is a slightly Hyderabadi, English accent, just to kind of capture that kind of dialect comes out. And as the conversation goes along, you can define how long the conversation is going to be. So you see there is step 1 out of 4. So we can define whether there are going to be 4 steps, 5 steps of to and fro conversation and so on. So how long will it go on? What is the mood and so on? All of this can be defined. Can you go to the next slide, please? Sorry about this. Okay, so once you go through this entire role play, you get your feedback. You get your feedback in terms of what's your score. How well did you do on a scale of 5. You also get feedback in terms of what you did well, what you did not do well, what got missed out. So we can even design the entire structure of the format. How do I want to give feedback? If we want to follow the DEI framework, for example, where we show, this was what you did, this was the impact of it, and this is what it did for the organization, for the conversation, for the team or whatever. So we can kind of design different ways of giving feedback here. We can say what is covered, what's not covered. So you're supposed to cover certain things in the conversation. Some of it got missed out. And on different skills that we have mapped, different competencies that we have mapped, what's your score? We can also do a calibration round here where we can do a manual versus AI review, that if our trainers on an average are giving 4 for a particular role play, then how can we calibrate the AI to give a similar score? So we can do a calibration based on what we would do internally. And you also certain slightly subjective things like your energy score, your confidence, your words per minute and so on. So there's more and more feedback that can be given, but all of this is something the learner gets. What do we get and how do we create such role plays? How fast is it? So can I take questions at the end? I'll just show you how it's done and I'll take questions. So how are these really created? So creating a pitch whiz, creating a grow whiz scenario takes me about 5 minutes on the back end. One is I can fill up the entire admin that I'm showing you, but I can do it as simple as putting things on a ChatGPT interface, where I can put 2-3 lines on what I want to create, and automatically all of this can get filled up. So what gets filled up? Here I'm actually giving the AI persona context, which is the brain of the conversation. I'm telling the AI that you, Vikram Singh, are a senior software developer with a history of innovation, and you've recently been passed over for a promotion, and there are also some personal issues because of which you have not been able to keep up. So there are a lot of things told to the AI which the learner doesn't even know, but he will only understand what the real issues are if he's probed. We can also put certain guardrails, because when it's Gen AI, the conversation can go in any way, right? You're just giving prompts at the end of the day. But if we want to ensure that certain things are covered or certain things are mentioned at a certain point, we can put them as guardrails. For example, at step 3, mention that your personal issues are something that have taken a toll on you and you wanted support at this time. I can ensure that the AI says a particular thing, not a script, but a point. How the AI says it, the tonality is actually up to them based on everything else we have defined. I can kind of map the skills, and I can actually make this either an assessment or a learning. So if we want to give it as a learning, we will give more and more inputs to the learner at the end of the day, but I can also make it as an assessment center. For performance appraisals, for hiring, I want to use this as an assessment center where I filter out people. I can also do it like that, where I don't give people feedback or their score. They just do their role play and it's done. Finally, you'll see here that there is step 1, step 2, step 3, and at step 3, I can give additional context. So this is a specific prompt or a guardrail that I'm giving at a certain stage to ensure that certain elements to the conversation really play out. So I wanted to ensure that I showed you this entire journey. Just to kind of conclude, we do only conversational role plays, which can be part of any platform or can be a part of any intervention that we're driving. It could be used pre-training, where let's say imagine 30 people coming to a classroom, have already done these role plays and we have all their feedback about how they did it in the past. We do the entire session and post that we get feedback of what they do after the session, 1 week later, 1 month later and so on. We can use this for hiring assessments. We can use this as assessment centers for promotion. There are a lot of use cases that kind of come in. And once we deploy, there's more and more iterations to make it even more specific for the organization and to make it more and more foolproof as we find out more and more what people actually do on the ground. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Maybe if I can take one question that someone had. Yeah, I think you had a question. Someone out there had a question. Okay. I'll just check what was the issue. Otherwise, please come to the booth. It's right at the entrance. I'll be happy to show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rohan. I would request you to please stay back on the stage. For felicitation, I would like to call Mr. Pawan on dais to felicitate Mr. Rohan.